So today we're going to talk about the domain of other directedness, and sometimes people kind of get confused with some of the schemas in this particular domain. But one of the underlying themes, if you like, is that the individual came from an environment where they had to regulate the caregiver in some way. Perhaps they had to regulate a parent's mental health issues, a depressed mother, a depressed father. Perhaps they had to regulate a volatile environment where they had an explosive parent, an alcoholic parent of some sort, or maybe they had to regulate the parent by achieving, by being the golden child, the parentified child. So the schemas that we're going to be talking about today that sit under that particular domain include self-sacrifice and subjugation. I'm Rita Younan, clinical psychologist, certified schema therapist, supervisor trainer.
And I'm Ruth Holt. Welcome to 7-Minute Schemas. We're going through all 18 of the schemas as part of Jeffrey Young's Schema Therapy. And today we are thinking about those two schemas, subjugation, which is often about surrendering control to other people because someone can feel really coerced and really kind of oppressed. And it can be a subjugation of their needs, their own desires, their preferences, or it can be a subjugation of their emotions, that they're not allowed to kind of express their own feelings in a relationship. It can also, so that's subjugation, but then we've got self-sacrifice, which is again surrendering, but it's surrendering to meet the needs of other people because that's the right thing to do. And so if we're thinking about the difference between those two kind of schemas, if we think about subjugation, there's a sense of having to because of fear. I'm fearful of the other. I have to surrender to them and I don't have control. I have to do it. Whereas self-sacrifice is a little bit more based on a should, a moral kind of imperative, and often fueled by guilt rather than fear. And it's a sense of, well, I'm choosing because this is the right way to be. So I think it can be helpful to kind of think about it as sort of more a fear base or more a guilt base when we're thinking about the two different schemas. How does it present in the room, in your experience, Rita?
Sometimes a presenting problem when people have these schemas might be just not being able to set limits at work, feeling overworked, taking too much responsibility, constantly sacrificing themselves in order to get the job done because they feel guilty, perhaps leaving at 5 o'clock, for example. Or they have a lot of interpersonal problems where they find they're fearful about expressing what they need and what they want because they may be punished, abandoned, retaliated against. Again, these schemas tend to be what Jeff calls as conditional schemas that develop as a result of giving us some relief from primary ones. Self-sacrifice in relationships in terms of, again, just kind of taking so much responsibility for the relationship that it might correlate with anger, that people find themselves really kind of quite annoyed or resentful that they're the ones that are always taking chicken soup to the friend. I'm always so thoughtful and considerate of others, but no one's ever considerate of me. In fact, Ruth, you have a really lovely metaphor in terms of explaining self-sacrifice in relationships, and that when we start to target these schemas and there are some therapeutic gains, that people start to have a little bit of conflict, and you tend to demonstrate this in training. Would you mind doing that now for us?
Well, we always have pens on us, hopefully, as therapists. And one of the things I think that is useful to really help a client grasp the interpersonal elements that we're talking about here is the sense that when they're subjugating or when they're self-sacrificing, they're the ones who are kind of giving, doing, looking after others. And often that means that there's people in their life who might even be entitled, might feel like, yes, you should be doing things for me, or they might just be used to having things done for them. And so when we're starting to make some headway with people with these schemas, when they're starting to get a little bit more assertive, their healthy adult is starting to kind of assert their own needs, we would love it if the other person in the relationship felt very pleased for them and cheered them on. But typically, actually, the people in that end of the spectrum, they really quite like this dynamic. And so sometimes when someone's shifting the dynamic, they will instead ratchet up the domination, the control, the attack. In typical domestic violence relationships, that's what we see all the time. That when somebody starts to be assertive and starts to set some boundaries, typically the other person actually becomes more reactive, and we've got to be really careful then, particularly in domestic violence situations, that we give them an ability to keep themselves safe while making change.
And when those kinds of things happen, what can happen is that people kind of default back into self-sacrifice or subjugating themselves out of fear of change, because the conflict starts to kind of make them just kind of want to give up on the therapy process. Things are just getting worse. It's not getting better. Therapy is not actually helping. And in fact, the research that we did at the Victoria Clinic when we did the Schema Therapy inpatient program for BPD, we used a quality of life measure. And interestingly enough, the one variable about relationships was actually elevated, that as treatment went on, that they endorse that as becoming more difficult, which of course is a sign of progress.
Mm. So I guess it can be really good to have some simple questions and simple ways of helping a client to tell, is this my healthy adult doing this behavior, looking after someone, or is it more that compliant, subjugatory, self-sacrificey side? And some of the questions I use are things like, am I giving to that person out of a sense of fullness, or am I giving to that person out of a sense of emptiness, that I have to be like that for you to like me, or for you to, accept me or not hurt me? I think it's also good to notice, is there anger? Is there resentment sitting there? If I'm getting a lot of anger and resentment, chances are it's not healthy adult giving. It's actually a very compliant surrenderer, self-sacrificer giving. Or is the ratio of giving to getting a bit off? That I'm always giving, they're always getting. That's often a good question.
And in addition to that, Ruth, a lovely way to perhaps complement that is doing some imagery through behavioural pattern breaking and getting the healthy adult to actually practice perhaps being assertive with their partner, noticing the feelings, does it connect with anything, and trying to kind of encourage them to take these steps in imagery and then in life as well.
Mm. Well, there's our 7 minutes, Rita. And so if people want to find out more information about training opportunities, there'll be some at the end of this video.